If a blind drawing gets you to start seeing in that different way, the way that you need to see in order to start making your observational drawings better, then partial peak drawing, a term originated from Betty Edwards in her book Drawing on the Right Hand Side of the Brain, is a halfway house. The main focus again is that you're spending longer looking at the model than at the paper. In introductory drawing sessions, I've sometimes set the task of allowing students to draw the figure without any instruction. And when I've looked at the students drawing the model for maybe 10 minutes, what I've noticed is that they might spend 4 seconds looking at their paper and 1 second looking at the model. Sometimes I've seen it where a student has spent 10 seconds looking at their paper and 1 second looking at the model, which fundamentally means that you're drawing the figure from memory, and visual memory is incredibly poor. With partial peak drawing, what you're trying to do is you're really trying to spend time slowly looking, thinking about this line in space, thinking about what angle this line has with this line. It's not important to know that you're drawing an arm or a wrist. You're really trying to think about the nature of that shape. When you're making a drawing, the longer the distance you travel in a drawing, the more likely you are to mismeasure, to make visual mistakes. So again, if there's any way of breaking a big distance down into smaller distances, for instance in this case looking at how the shoulder relates to some fabric, thinking through the fabric, thinking through the creases and folds of the fabric will help you navigate and begin to understand how big that arm is. So you've travelled the little distances to find the big distances. As we move into the next space, again the creases and folds of the fabric, thinking about their proximity to each other will help you navigate through that gap across the thorax into the hips. When you're drawing in this way, you're really conscious of the nature of the edge that you're drawing, whether you're drawing a soft form or a hard form. And that quality can be executed in the line that you make. In introductory drawing sessions, the use of a fine line pen or a biro I think is really useful, in that it's a permanent mark. You can't rub it out. So you have to really think then about the nature of the mark that you're making. You mustn't be tempted to make one of those sort of sketchy lines. Whilst that has its place in other kinds of drawing, the problem is that there becomes a disconnect between what your eye is seeing and what your hand is doing. It becomes a sort of an automatic gesture. And really you want to slow down. You really want to notice what you're drawing. As we start to consider the drawing like this, perhaps one of the most difficult areas to draw is the head. It's the place where we're much more likely to think that we know what we're drawing. So again, try to think about not the head, but the series of shapes that make it up. This head at the moment is making shapes with the fabric behind it. As you're making the drawing, if you realise that you've made the line in the wrong place, don't worry. Simply put it back in its new place. Use the previous line to tell you where you've gone wrong. Your eye will naturally find that correct line. And ignore the other. be very, very mindful of the space between features. So when you're drawing an eye, don't think about the eye, but think about the space between the forehead and the eyebrow. Think about the space between the eyebrow and the eyelid. Think about the white space between the eyes. Particularly in a foreshortened figure, the configuration of features might be really different to what you're used to seeing. As we try to move up the leg, we want to think about the best way of getting there. And again, if it's possible, can we travel a long distance by going through small ones? So behind this figure here, I've got some fabric. Near to the top of that head, I've got an edge of table. Near to the corner of that fabric, I've got the other edge of table. That starts to get me further up through the thigh. The space behind that window frame will then start to tell me where that thigh ends. And so again, I've used small distances to travel the big ones. Going this way, same thing. If I got distances across the fabric, it may be that in a life model situation you've got the model and you've got easels behind the figure. As you grow confident with this kind of drawing, you don't necessarily have to include them in the drawing, but you use them in your own sighting to work out where things are. When you're looking at something floating in space like a heel, you have to think across the figure. How far up is that heel? So you're looking at almost a cross-referencing section. So I've noticed that the heel is at the same height as that kind of crook of the arm. Again, try not to travel around the outside of the figure if you can. Think about going across the figure, backwards and forwards, using the smaller forms until you locate it. Again, I talk about sometimes jumping ship. As you start to draw one object, you might jump ship and draw another. So here I'm going to concentrate not on the legs, but on the shape between the legs, the triangle that's made. As I come down to this side, again I can pick up that angle of the table, and then I can use this negative shape to help me find out the edge of the toes. And through there, where the edge of that heel is. So partial peak drawing, like blind drawing, is about slowing down. It's about noticing the idiosyncrasies of each line. It's about building the drawing by drawing the small shapes rather than the large ones. It's about consciously using strategies to try to avert your attention away from the object that you're drawing, and you're trying to think about the shape that it makes. As you use this kind of drawing, the more you use it, the more familiar you become, the faster the speed of your drawing. So initially, don't worry so much about incomplete drawings. Instead, think about, is this getting there? Is this getting closer to the thing that I can see in front of me? And if that's being achieved, then you're on the right path.